Today, we're going back to the catalogue of a developer that I've discussed in at least 3 previous reviews, and this is one of their older add-ons and all, featuring a part of Scotland that's famous in real life for spectacular scenery, semi-regular steam-hauled excursions, and its connection to hairy butter. This is an overview of, and my 2 cents on, the West Highland Line Extension Fort William to Mallaig route add-on. The West Highland Line Extension add-on was developed by Thomson Interactive with help from Keith Ross, and released way back in early October 2014. All these years later, the add-on is still available to buy on Steam for 48 New Zealand dollars, or around £21, at full price. As the add-on's name implies, it focuses on the 41 miles of track from Fort William to Mallaig, but you also get an extra 7 miles out to Spian Bridge, on the main West Highland Line heading back towards Glasgow. I don't know about you, but personally, I'm confused as to why the section out to Spian Bridge was included in this add-on. By the way, if you're wondering where I got this reskin of the Class 25, depicting those 3 members of the class rebuilt as electric train heating vehicles, this is available on the Vulcan Productions website. The Ethel reskin requires Dovetail's BR Blue pack and the Armstrong Powerhouse Class 33 sound pack, although the latter is one of numerous AP packs that has long since been discontinued without a replacement. Go figure. Fort William Station is a dead-end terminus, but trains running from Glasgow to Mallaig, or vice versa, use it as a reversing point, in the same way that Plymouth to Gunnislake trains use Beer-Elston as a reversing point. It's worth mentioning that the Fort William station modelled for TS is not the original, but rather the replacement station opened in 1975, when the line was cut back 640 metres from its original terminus to make way for improvements on the A82 road. Incidentally, this building next to Fort William Station is a Morrison's in real life. According to the manual, the 10 scenarios included with the Fort William to Mallaig add-on are set between 1987 and 1989, when Class 37-4s were the dominant motive power on the line, but the in-game route is modelled in a more general time frame, so that other motive power that wouldn't fit the late 80s theme can still run here without looking too out of place. Speaking of the Class 37-4, that's the only locomotive included with the Fort William to Mallaig add-on. This version of the Class 37 is not a rehash of the older Kuju or RSC era 37s, but rather, it was a new model built from the ground up by Thomson Interactive themselves. The features on Thomson's 37 include, but are not limited to, sounds recorded from a real 37, correct nameplates for the 25 37-4s that ran in Scotland, although the nameplates are 2D and noticeably low resolution, functional gauges on the fuel tank, dynamically animated cooling fan on the roof, openable windows and doors on both sides of the cab, which are visible on the external model as well as in the internal cab view, and, most importantly, a working hot plate. Now if only I had a Cornish pasty on hand. Personally, I think it's a pity that the Thomson 37 is only supplied in one livery, namely British Rail large logo blue, since there are photographs out there to show that this wasn't the only livery that you'd see on 37s in the Highlands in the late 80s. And is it just me, or is this locomotive chucking out too much clag? As for other rolling stock included with the Fort William to Mallaig route, you get the same old RSC era Mark I coaches that have been recycled more times than I care to remember, but at least this time you also get the unique West Highland green and cream livery, although I reckon this depiction of the livery could have been better, not just where the texturing is concerned, but also because the decals that you see on the coaches in-game are a little bit too old for scenarios set in the late 80s. There's also a Mark III sleeper coach in BR blue and grey, OTA log wagons, OAA open wagons, which appear to be carrying old sleepers, TTA tanker wagons, PCA, Illumina wagons, and YGH Sea Lion, or is it Sea Cow, ballast wagons. The aforementioned wagons are all supplied in varying states of cleanliness, and I think the rolling stock selection is mostly recycled from previous add-ons, with the YGH ballast wagon being the only one that's not jumping out at me as obviously being recycled. I dare say someone will correct me if I'm wrong. If my research is correct, a set of 6 Mark I coaches received the green and cream livery in 1985 as part of the then-new steam-hauled tourist service between Fort William and Mallaig. You can find photographs from the mid-80s on Flickr, which show the coaches hauled by either LMS Black 5 460s, or the sole surviving respective examples of the LNER K1 and K4 class 260s. For this part of the video, I decided to use the K1, which was brought to TS by Victory Works. And I chose the K1 because I was in the mood for a bit more variety, having only just made a video about the Black 5, and I haven't got the K4 from Just Trains. In real life, the Mark I variants that received this livery were the TSO, BSO and BCK, none of which are included in the Fort William to Mallaig add-on for whatever reason. Instead, you get this livery on the FK, SK and RMB variants, which of course is unrealistic, and the absence of a suitably painted brake coach makes an in-game set of green and cream Mark Is look incomplete. Not helping the situation was Armstrong Powerhouse leaving out this unique livery when they made their own Mark I pack in early 2020. Why it was omitted from AP's pack is anyone's guess. Come to think of it, are there any publicly available West Highland reskins for the AP Mark Is? The West Highland Line Extension is mostly single track, with crossing loops only at 2 stations, namely Glenfinnan and Mallaig. The in-game route is notable for including a functional RETB system, RETB being short for Radio Electric Token Block. This unique radio-based signalling was introduced in the 1980s to replace the older single-line key token system. With the post-80s RETB, drivers have to contact the control centre, in the signal box at Bunna V Station, in order to request or exchange tokens, with the tokens granting their holder sole access to a given section of track. Drivers also need to tune the radio to account for changes in frequency along the line. There are 3 locations along the Fort William to Mallaig route where you have to return your existing token and get a new one before proceeding into the next section. See this add-on's manual for a full explanation on how the RETB system works.
2278 signaler Banner V, over.
2278 signaler Banner V, state your message, over.
2278 standing direction stopboard, clear of the signal line, requesting token to proceed, over.
2278 press send to accept token, over.
2278 Loch Eel outward bound to Glenfinnan, section token on display, over.
2278 Loch Eel outward bound to Glenfinnan, section token confirmed. You have permission to pass the direction stopboard of Loch Eel outward bound and proceed to the DSB at Glenfinnan, over.
2278 understand I have permission to pass the DSB at Loch Eel outward bound and proceed to the DSB at Glenfinnan, out. 2278 signaller Banovi, over.
2278 signaller Banovi. State your message, over.
2278, have passed the station limit marker, over.
2278, confirmed. You have passed the station limits marker, out.
As demonstrated just then, the Class 37 that comes with this route has a functioning RETB module, with which you can interact in the default scenarios, and some of the additional scenarios that people have made on Steam Workshop. I think you have to do something in the scenario editor if you want RETB working in your own scenarios with Thomson's 37, but don't quote me on that. In any case, and out of personal preference, I normally like to run the Armstrong Powerhouse Class 37 on the rare occasions when I revisit this route, because I consider the AP37 to have superior modelling, texturing and sounds when compared to Thomson's 37. However, the AP37 doesn't work with the route's RETB system, and doesn't even have a dummy RETB module in the cab on the BR large logo variants. Come to think of it, another appropriate form of motive power for this route is the Class 156, and I'm using the AP version. But this unit doesn't have a functioning RETB module either, nor does she even have a dummy RETB module. What's going on here? Lack of dummy RETB modules in the AP37 and 156 aside, I would be remiss if I didn't do a side-by-side comparison with the Thomson and AP37s. Which one do you prefer? Apart from Thomson's own 37, there is at least one other locomotive that does work with the RETB signalling, that being the LMS Black 5 from Precision Locomotive Developments, and you can use this locomotive to recreate the famous Jacobite service. As an aside, and to my mind at least, the Jacobite is kind of like a Scottish equivalent of the Transalpine in New Zealand. You know, a world-famous train running through really scenic and mountainous terrain, but it's primarily for tourists and the ticket prices are through the roof. Thanks KiwiRail, and your lack of a discounted fare for New Zealand residents, grumble grumble grumble. Anyway, another locomotive you could run on the West Highland Extension is the Great Western Hall Class 460, which happens to be another PLD product. The pack includes a BR Crimson variant of 5972 Alton Hall, which is the closest that the developer could get to a proper Hogwarts Express delivery due to licensing restrictions. The route may not be all that long in the grand scheme of things, but it takes a long time, the better part of 2 hours to be specific, to cover the full run from Wortvilium to Mallaig. This is due to speed limits averaging only 30 to 40 miles per hour for locomotive-hauled trains, with more relaxed speed limits for multiple units like the Class 156. Starting out from Fort William, the line is mostly flat, especially when you're running alongside a Lochiel, but as you get closer to Glenfinnan, the terrain gets noticeably more mountainous, and stays that way for most of the rest of the journey to Mallaig. For a significant portion of the journey, especially west of Glenfinnan, you'll be tackling gradients that get as steep as 1 in 50, or even 1 in 40 in some places, so make sure to keep an eye on the brakes when you're going downhill. Apart from the small town of Mallaig and the villages of Mallaig and Glenfinnan, the only significantly built-up area on this route is the section from Fort William to Corpark. The West Highland Extension runs through a very remote but still scenic part of the Scottish Highlands, passing numerous tiny stations in the middle of nowhere and crossing the world-famous Glenfinnan viaduct. I remember seeing this thing in Chamber of Secrets, but I don't remember if it appears in any other Harry Potter films, probably because I've only seen the first 3, and no more than that because the Harry Potter franchise, and the fantasy genre in general, is not my cup of tea. 2 stops down the line from Mallaig, heading back towards Fort William, you'll find Mallaig, which is apparently the most westerly station in all of mainland Britain, even further west than Penzance. Thinking back to Barnaby for a moment, it's worth mentioning the unique animated swing bridges just beyond the station, heading towards Mallaig. Thomson didn't need to make the bridges animated, given how unlikely it would be for players to see them moving when they're driving along as normal, but I'm happy to see that they added this feature nonetheless. If Thomson could pull this off in 2014, One wonders why Armstrong Powerhouse didn't bother implementing animated swing bridges on their Wherry Lines route, initially released in 2016, 2 years after the West Highland Extension. Come to think of it, I wonder how long it would take to get through that staircase of locks just beyond the road bridge. Apart from the Bunavie swing bridges and Glenfinnan viaduct, other things along the route that stick out to me include this Highland stag I found next to the track between Fort William and Spean Bridge, a ship called Nevis Ranger moored at the start of the Caledonian Canal, adjacent to Core Park Station, a small boathouse and pier next to the track at Lochiel outward bound, the section between Glenfinnan and Loch Ailort, where you're running alongside Loch Eelt, and the spot between Loch Ailort and Beesdale, where I found 2 stags on opposite sides of the track from each other. At least I think they're stags. Aside from the passenger services, there are a few opportunities to run freight services on this route, as Thomson included the sidings running to a large timber mill at Core Park. There's also a small yard for TTA oil tankers just outside Fort William, not to mention the depot just past the junction as you head for Mallaig, and at this depot, you can shunt and assemble sets of coaches prior to heading out on the Jacobite or whatever other service you feel like recreating. Just outside Fort William, on the line heading out towards Spean Bridge, you'll find this aluminium smelter complex. I think the PCA wagons would be appropriate for this place, but don't quote me on that. There's a decent amount of custom assets throughout the route, including lineside foliage, bridges, tunnels, stations and non-railway buildings, and it all results in the immediate trackside scenery looking quite nice, especially for a route this old. There's also some ambient wildlife audio that you can hear in various places throughout the route. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that, in the default scenarios set in winter, you get to plough through dynamic snowdrifts, which can be set up in the scenario editor if you want them in your own scenarios. However, one can't really forget to mention the comparatively poor scenery on the distant hills, which A, gives me flashbacks to the Arosa line in TSW, and B, can be something of a visual distraction as you're driving along. On my end, this route's performance is decent, averaging between 30 and 75 frames per second, but it drops closer to 30 in areas with greater scenery density. The route is reasonably stable in all, in the sense that it hasn't caused a crash to desktop throughout this review's production. One more thing to note on the Thomson 37. The normal keyboard command for the instrument lights, that being the I key, doesn't work, but the cab lights keyboard command does. You can only turn the instrument lights on or off by clicking and dragging the switch on the wall above the driver's seat. Come to think of it, it's a pity that the needles in the brake pressure gauge don't move when you blast the horn, as they do on the AP37. All things considered, I reckon that Thomson Interactive's West Highland Line Extension still holds up well after all these years, and one can't forget the unique RETB system and what that brings to the table, although the distant scenery could certainly be improved, and the included coaches and wagons are looking somewhat outdated these days, especially where the RSC era Mark Is are concerned, and it's disappointing to see so few locomotives properly equipped for the RETB system. As for Thomson's Class 37/4, that was reasonably good for her time, but I'm of the opinion that she's largely been superseded by the AP37, despite the latter's lack of a functioning RETB module. In any case, I would still recommend this route to TS Classic players who like a slower paced journey through scenic mountainous terrain, not to mention travelling along a line with connections to Harry Potter. If they're a fan of Harry Potter, of course. Although I don't revisit the Fort William to Mallaig route all that much, I still have a soft spot for this route, as I remember picking it up very soon after its initial release. It doesn't really feel like 2014 was 12 years ago, if you ask me. Come to think of it, if you've got West Highland Line Extension, West Highland Line South, and suburban Glasgow Northwest, you could run from Glasgow Queen Street all the way to Mallaig in TS Classic, albeit with breaks in the journey at Helensburgh Upper and Fort William. As for where I'd rate the West Highland Extension add-on as it currently stands, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. In summary, it has aged reasonably well, but there's room for improvement where the distant scenery is concerned. That's without getting into the inaccuracies of the included West Highland Green and Cream coaches. If you've stuck around to the end of the video, you win a song that is essentially just a bizarre medley of Jerry Rafferty and Tony Basil. It's Baker Street Beat.